Okay, so yes, I think we talked before about the chip butty and the Spanish tortilla pinchos. Like for Spanish people, their perception was that this chip butty was something horrible, but then they have pretty much the same thing in their own country. It's just the way you look at it, and something that again people have a very different idea about the same thing. For example, I don't want to go into politics per se, but if you look at, for example, Theresa May in the United Kingdom at the moment, to British people, she's a conservative and she's very, very right wing. But if an American looks at her and looks at the policies of her government, like National Health Service and pensions and things like that, an American would think that she was a socialist based on their perception and their perspective. So this is something, again, that you might struggle with when you're going to another country or dealing with a foreigner in talking your language, that what you understand by one thing is completely different in another country.
I think that's a really important part. And oftentimes the only place where we get our information is from the news or maybe travel magazines if you're going someplace. And that gives a specific type of perception and not necessarily an accurate one. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the lectures that I spent some time in Medellin in Colombia. Well, Medellin in Colombia was the murder capital of the world 12 years ago. It had the cartel running it. They elected a mayor, and the mayor said, "I am going to clean up the cartel," and they shot the mayor dead. So they had another election. This mayor said, "I am going to stop the cartel." They shot him. They went through 4 mayors. And they finally, they had a female mayor got elected, and she said, "I'm going to stop the cartel." And I think at that point, they said, how many mayors do we have to kill, right? And it just sort of changed and evolved from this murder capital to now just an amazing city. It actually got an award 2 years ago for the work that it's done to make it easy for people in the ghetto, the low-income areas, to actually get down the mountain and to work. And so they put in this system so that people can actually work, improve themselves. They've cleaned up all these areas that were really bad. Not to say that there aren't still some bad ones. Every city has areas that you don't go to. But it's like incredibly clean, incredibly safe, as any city can be, right? And yet when people heard I was going there, it's like, you're not going to Colombia, you're not going to Medellin, you know how dangerous it is. It's like, it's not what you think.
Yes, the perceptions are very, very, very different. Yes, and I think, as well as, like you said, about how people perceive safety or how people perceive a country being better or worse than another. There was a very good example of that with some of my students from Japan. They were always complaining about London. They're saying, "It's always raining in London. London, it never stops raining. I hate London. It's always raining. I love the culture, but I hate the weather." And then I did some checking on the weather in Japan. And Japan gets about 50% more rainfall than London.
Oh.
Yes. So I was telling the students about this, and they were going, but we have it all in one go during the rainy season. In London, it rains more days.
It's rains less rain, all the time.
Often. Yes.
I've had that conversation about Vancouver, because in Medellin, rainy season it rains at 4 in the morning 4 in the afternoon for an hour, and it was sunny or dry season it rains for 30 minutes at 6 o'clock. Because you look down, if there's 2 mountains, you look down the mountain and you see this big cloud come up, and then it dumps a pile of rain for an hour, 20 minutes, depending on what time of year it is, and then it goes away. And that's it. But every day, like, you can set your watch by it pretty near. And, so it probably gets as much rain, if not a little bit more, than Vancouver. But in describing Vancouver to people in Medellin, I say, well, it starts raining at 4 in the morning, and it stops raining. It drizzles down. It doesn't pour like it does here, and it doesn't stop for 3 months. And that's Vancouver rain, right? And we've had those periods. Of course, we've also had drier periods. But the rain is very different, and how people experience it is very different, because originally they were horrified because they were imagining their rainfall for a month. They'd be underwater because there's so much rain comes down in an hour. I mean, it's just pours, lightning, thunder. Vancouver, it's just this sort of drizzle. Sometimes you can walk through the water, like the water is actually hanging little droplets. You can just feel it splashing against your face, right? But not other times it rains hard too. But the perception is amazing how they have different. You know, if you say something and you know in your mind it's this, but because of their experience it's something else, and then you look at their eyes and it's like, oh wait, I didn't. You interpreted what I said like very differently than what it actually is.
That's true. Yeah, very true.
All right. In our next lecture, we're going to talk about the foreign school systems and how they teach English, and how that does not really help English as a second language workers when it comes to actually understanding what their co-workers and their bosses have to say.
Yep.